Okay, so today we're going to do a modified version of the climate advocacy training, and I hopefully have replaced every single slide with British backgrounds. This is the suggested agenda. I hope it's okay. If there's anything I'm missing, we can add to it. So we've already done the introductions to each other, and I would like to do an introduction to Citizens Climate Lobby, and then talk about carbon fee and dividend progress, and then jump into more of the advocacy training and our advisory board and the 5 levers of political will. And throughout, we will be weaving our Citizens Climate Lobby values and your questions. Does that sound okay?
Yeah, that's good.
Thank you. So Citizens Climate Lobby's purpose is to create the political will for a livable world. And we do that by empowering individuals to experience breakthroughs and exercising their political power. It's brilliant. And when you start affecting change by talking to politicians, using our methodology, it is an amazing feeling. Just a little bit about Citizens Climate Lobby. I work as the International Outreach Manager, and when I started out, there were 36 countries in our fold, and now there are 47. It's getting really busy over here. It started with the United States. Oh, I didn't, and then Canada, and then Australia, and then India, and then I didn't include UK in here, but it's just, those are the many countries that we have in our international fold. We are nonpartisan. We build relationships with everyone, even those who oppose us. In the USA, they have the charitable and nonpartisan not-for-profit status, and they're very volunteer driven. They produce remarkable results for very little money because, seriously, Citizens Climate Lobby volunteers are some of the best on the planet. And we're very solution focused. We are for a solution, and that solution is carbon fee and dividend. We're not against any solution. We hold the flag for carbon fee and dividend. And we operate from a place of respect, appreciation, and gratitude, and we treat everyone, even those who oppose us, with respect, appreciation, and gratitude. I'd like to get a little bit more into Citizens Climate Lobby's values. We are focused. We are highly focused on carbon fee and dividend. We know it won't solve the problem entirely, and we truly appreciate the work that all of our friends in other groups are doing. But so that we can be effective, we stay focused on doing work that leads us towards our core purpose, which is building political will for a livable world by empowering individuals and exercising their personal and political power and pushing towards carbon fee and dividend. And after we accomplish carbon fee and dividend and its firmly entrenched policy, then we will go on to tackle what we think is the next most impactful solution. What I love about CCL is their optimism. I read Charles Darwin's Origin of the Species a long time ago, and I know that most humans are good and altruistic. And we at CCL believe that people are good and that democracy works. We are confident that our approach will work because we see progress and we stand for a solution, not in protest of other solutions. This part's really important. We don't expect perfection from ourselves or others. This is a process. and we know that people can improve. Just for an example about not being perfect, for the first 6 months I was a citizen climate lobbyist, I didn't know what a revenue neutral carbon tax was, even though I was lobbying for it. So it took me a while to learn all the words. That was a long time ago. So we're learning and we're improving. And together we are a community that offers one another comfort, support, and fun. Fun is very important. We are a very relationships-focused organization, and we take a very generous approach to people as possible. That appreciation and gratitude and respect just opens doors. On Parliament Hill now, we have the in Canada, we have the reputation as the nice climate group, and it opens doors for us. We are honest, but we're also firm. If we don't agree, we're going to say it nicely. And we know there's a place to protest, but our approach is to build consensus. Yeah, they really do, even in the United States, say they're happy to meet with us and mean it. And is that the same sense you're getting in the in Britain, in the UK, or in Marlborough and London? Is that?
In fact, that's very relevant. If I can just chip in there, there was a big Extinction Rally in London this weekend. And Louisa and I had a chat about it, and then Judy and I had a chat about it. In the end, Judy and I went up and took part in it, albeit in the bit on Westminster Bridge where it wasn't quite as confrontational, I understand. Is that right, Judy?
Yeah.
So we managed not to be hauled away by police or anything. I mean, I found it incredibly useful because we had so many good conversations.
Absolutely.
But I think that's one of those things is how far do we take part in direct action, things like that, and how far are we just, should we say, the nice guys, or do they both go hand in hand?
Yeah, it's a spectrum of being really polite and kind and all that, and then the direct action, you can still do all that, and when do you amp it up? And it's important to know where you want to land on that spectrum anytime you do something. CCL really prefers the kind and polite and respectful, but you can take off your CCL hat and do the other if you wish.
I've no intention of laying down and being arrested. You know.
Okay.
I'm sorry, I didn't see any nice-looking policeman who I wanted to be carried away by, but no, seriously, I just felt it was a very useful opportunity to talk to a lot of people who are obviously, by their nature, going to be interested in climate change. So I had some very, very valuable conversations, and in fact made a very good link.
Well, wonderful. Any other comments to add to what Gina I think that was Gina, am I correct?
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
I actually noticed that in the literature, generosity and openness towards even the police was encouraged. The idea is to be attention getting. That really is the main idea.
The idea is to be what?
Attention getting.
Attention giving.
Attention getting. Yes.
Yeah.
And it was a lot of the literature I saw had been amazingly thoughtfully worked out to, to promote an idea that these are people who are in favor of life and friendship and relationships and having things work.
No, good. It sounds like it aligns with us.
I've been reading quite a lot of their stuff actually, and it seemed I think the director at the moment, not the director, but one of the, I think they called them the holding group, was a director of Transition Stroud, the Transition Towns movement, and a lot of what they're saying sounds like they've also been inspired by results in CCL as well. So apart from we're going to go out and try and get arrested, it's like almost like they've done maths on how many times they need to get arrested to get front page news. So
yes, exactly. Yeah.
But even then, they're at some point there still needs to be a policy at government level, even if they don't, that they've lost faith in democracy. You still at some point need something to give to government to actually sort out climate change. So I guess that's where we come in.
Wonderful.
Yeah. So I think that's a really good point about them not having about having specific policy. That actually Extinction Rebellion don't sort of have
yes, they
like,
do.
They're
very clear. Obviously.
Yeah, but sort of like in terms of the solution, it would be maybe interesting to if they were more aware of carbon fee and dividends as one solution for the carbon problem.
Yes, these are great events to go to bring our solution and find like-minded people. Everybody's got to do their own thing, and certainly this is how I've built up networks.
Yeah, one of our supporters made a brilliant little A6 handout, and you could just give it to somebody. It had the 3 big punchlines on, gave you, time to have a quick conversation and move on. So, I had 20 good conversations in an hour and a quarter, and then had just run out of leaflets, and I couldn't find Judy because we didn't manage to have our mobile phones with us. But, we can't have all this technology all the time.
Yeah, no, the relationships are great. So I think we're getting a sense here that the CCL values already exist over in Marlborough and London and Wiltshire. Did I say that correctly?
Wiltshire.
Yep.
Come from.
Yeah.
Wiltshire. Okay, we'll do the last 2 values and then we will continue. We use our voices to be heard. This is our personal power. Constituents speaking to our members of parliament or Congress for our friends in Madison, very powerful. This simple act transforms us from being spectators in our democracy to full citizens. And it reveals the true nature of democracy to us. We are volunteer driven and we trust all of you to make important decisions. We don't micromanage you. And we trust you to create and develop things that will be valued by Citizens Climate Lobby. You need to do it your way, in your situation. And we truly are nonpartisan. And you are welcome no matter where you live, what you wear, what you do for a living, who you voted for in the last election to belong with us. We work with elected officials and community leaders from across the political spectrum because we believe everyone is a potential ally. So we're just going to quickly hop, skip, and jump through global warming to get us to our next part, our climate change. Burning coal, gas, and oil produces carbon dioxide. This is warming the planet, shifting our climate. What we're trying to do is correct a market failure. There are 4 basic options we can choose from. There's regulation, cap and trade, carbon tax, and carbon fee and dividend. Regulation is the most expensive, and the models are coming out that in Canada, the IPCC, I can't say it for every country, that it would be almost impossible to reach our Paris goals with regulation alone. Cap and trade is a type of carbon pricing. We put a cap on emissions and they trade it, whatever. It's complex. And it's what the European Union has. Then there's a carbon tax to be distinguished from carbon fee and dividend. A carbon tax is you would take money from carbon pollution, take that money and put it into the general coffers for the government. And then finally, there's carbon fee and dividend. And we'll focus in on carbon fee and dividend because that is the option we have chosen. We feel it is a nonpartisan climate solution that will appeal to many political stripes. If we want to stop something, we make it more expensive to pollute. If can do this with carbon fee and dividend. I apologize for the one and only US slide that I have here. I think it's just the only one. So put a price on carbon pollution at the extraction point, or when it comes out, crosses our border. That money goes into whatever your Treasury Department is, and then it's 100% net refund to U.S. households. The more fossil fuel intensive the products, the more expensive they'll be, and the less intensive they are, the cheaper they'll be. So we'll say this in another way. A fee is placed on carbon-based fuels at the source, the well, the mine, port of entry, starts at $15 a ton of CO2 emitted and increases steadily each year by $10. It sends a clear market signal so businesses know what to expect and they can plan. And does not burden the poor or middle class with tax increases. In fact, the data is coming out so clearly now, and I'm sorry I don't have UK data, and we can talk about that at the end if there is. In fact, most households come out ahead in Canada, the USA, and Australia. I just got data this morning from Australia under carbon fee and dividend. So the average household, as the price increases, will start at getting just over $200 a ton. Over $200 when it's $20 a ton, and then it gradually goes up to $50 a ton. But look at how the bottom 20% comes out ahead in Australia. This will reduce income inequality. So anyone who is a progressive, or what, I don't know what your term is in where you live, who is worried about income inequality, at least carbon fee and dividend temporarily would solve that. Obviously, once we get carbon out of our economy, it will no longer be a way to reduce income inequality, but it is an important step in doing that.
Sorry, Cathy, for some reason I can't see the bottom of that or the key on that slide. Could you just tell me what the yellow and black bars are?
The yellow is the average household.
Yeah.
And the black is the bottom quintile.
Thank you.
So the average household does come out ahead.
Yeah.
That's a net household dividend, but the bottom 20% really comes out ahead in Australia. And it's similar in Canada.
Yeah.
And the United States.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Is there carbon fee and dividend data for the UK yet? Is your UK for carbon and dividends people, have they produced studies yet? I'm sorry, I don't have them.
I'm just looking at the policy exchange report. I don't know if you can see my screen. I'm just looking at the policy exchange report and see if they've got any figures on.
I'm pretty sure they have a graph in there.
Yeah, I'll have a look as we go on and I'll let you know.
Okay. This is just, it's not regulation. Regulation is, some people might want, no, carbon fee and dividend is a market solution. It's very little government involvement. The market does most of the work. With regulation, you would have lots of government. And technically, it's not a tax because a tax would, the government would take the revenue and do stuff with it. No, if they do not use the revenue, then technically it's not a tax. Okay, what will be the effects? Okay, I'm going to give you more American data, but here's why. Because the United States is like doing really poorly with regards to their action on climate change, and the United States and China are the two biggest polluters. So if they don't do much, then it's going to be very hard for the rest of the world. Thankfully, China is moving along. And whatever happens in the USA will affect us all. Obviously, Canada more than the UK, but still, it impacts the whole world. So this data here, this map here, if you're looking at it, shows countries and their ranking of their commitments to reducing greenhouse gas emissions. And the gray means they're very poor, and that's Russia, Saudi Arabia, Turkey, USA, and Ukraine. The EU is doing better than Canada. We're having a real rough go of it, but we used to be in the gray category, so at least we bumped up one category. Just recently, only India is the only G20 nation that is compatible with the 1.5. This data is a little bit outdated. It just came out the other day. The only G20 country. The rest of us are not compatible with the 1.5 degree world. So it's important to follow what's going on in the USA because it impacts us all. And hopefully there'll be good news soon. But let's see what happens when carbon fee and dividend is enacted as written in the USA. They will see a 31% decrease in greenhouse gas emissions within the next 10 years and a 50% reduction within 20 years. And that's below 1990 levels.
Cathy, the policy exchange, they reckon they could, with carbon fee and dividend, 30% reduction would happen within 4 years. So they were
wow.
They were even more optimistic.
No, that was the Climate Solutions cost. That was the Climate Solutions Coalition, I think.
Yes, yeah, but they said that at the launch, didn't they? That they thought 4 years.
Is that the American policy, the Baker-Schultz plan that you're talking about?
That's right.
Yeah.
Okay.
I don't think it was 4 years. It was pretty fast. Something like in 35, I think they said. Let's see how long's that.
Yeah, it gets very confusing if you don't know what year level they're referring to. And yeah, and the Baker-Schultz plan is a carbon fee and dividend policy, but it's not exactly like CCL's, and I don't know the details. But these policies have the power to transform. And another thing to consider when looking at all these models is they assume 20th century economics and the technology of today being implemented. They do not take into consideration, the models don't take into consideration innovation impacts on reducing emissions. So the stuff could be more powerful than we imagine. These are very conservative models. So we could theoretically get very close in the United States. The United States could get very close to achieving the 1.5 emissions reduction, the 1.5C goal just with carbon fee and dividend. It's borderline, and I have the data. I saw it last week in Washington, D.C., and it'll be online next week because we're recording it. But very exciting how carbon fee and dividend in the USA gets them very close to the 1.5 goal. So we have 800 days or so to figure this out, and carbon fee and dividend is almost a silver bullet, at least for the USA. Maybe not for every country, but this is hopeful data.
It's
Sorry,
very
why 800 days?
Pardon?
Why 800 days?
Oh, okay. The 800 days is the IPCC 1.5 C report said that we must start decreasing our greenhouse gas emissions by 2020 if we are to do this in an economically efficient way. Otherwise, it gets really difficult. Like, we have to start sucking CO2 out of the atmosphere because we will start overshooting what we potentially can. We won't be able to decrease our CO2 emissions fast enough thereafter. Like, it would be almost impossible. So we have 800 days to do this to start decreasing our emissions.
Is that particular little nugget going to come out online soon? Because I haven't
it's in the IPCC 1.5 report. It's a buzz phrase that we don't have time organization is using. And yeah, if you look at the IPCC data, and we will be doing a deep dive into that next week, at about this time, a little bit earlier, on Friday, November the 30th, that it gets very difficult after 2020 if we don't start decreasing our emissions by then. It starts to get more and more difficult to avert disaster by 2040. We're expending our budget.
Right. Yeah. Okay. Thanks very much. Yeah.
Yeah. It's all super technical, but simply said, carbon fee and dividend will get us pretty close, at least the USA, to the 1.5 C limit by 2030. Not all the way, but obviously there's other policies that need to be enacted as well. But it's a big chunk. It will also, if enacted, carbon fee and dividend will also save 227,000 American lives. It will also increase income as well. America is wealthier every single year of the policy. And this is just how it unfolds in the USA. It's pretty complicated, but basically the bottom 2/3 come out ahead. It will create 2.1 million new jobs in 10 years. And you would think it would be in the green technology, in like clean technologies, but a lot of those jobs will be in healthcare and service and retail, because people will, and food, because people will have more money to spend, and they will tend, and households will tend to spend that money on healthcare and food, and it will create 10.8 million new jobs over the next 20 years. And the GDP will grow. And believe me, they need it, because they're almost at like what, $850 trillion a year debt in the USA? Yeah, they need some help. And that's how much it will grow over 20 years. Almost 1.4 trillion. Okay, so switching gears a little bit to the USA's neighbor to the north. This is us on October 15th on Parliament Hill, getting ready to go lobby. That's about 2/3 of the people that were there. And while we were on Parliament Hill, 3 members of Parliament told me that Trudeau was going to enact carbon fee and dividend. And I had to hold it under my hat, because he can't say anything officially until the government says it. When I drove home from this conference, I was laughing and crying in my car, knowing what was coming. And it wasn't supposed to be announced until November the 1st, but they pushed forward the deadline. And on October 23rd, Prime Minister Trudeau announced the first carbon fee and dividend law in the world. And it starts at $20 per ton in 2019, rising $10 per ton annually until it reaches $50 per ton in 2022. Residents and businesses in Ontario, Saskatchewan, Manitoba, and New Brunswick, the four provinces subject to the federal tax because they have decided that they don't want to price carbon, will receive rebate checks that will exceed the carbon tax they paid by the average family. And it's actually the bottom 80% come out ahead in Canada. And in fact, we're going to get our climate action incentive money in April 29th before the carbon fee starts. And Trudeau summed up the problem. It's free to pollute, so we have too much pollution, so we need to put a price on pollution. October 23rd was probably one of the happiest days of my life. It was a glorious day. 8 years of hard work, 13 times going to Parliament Hill. Our volunteers across Canada just busting their butts over the last 8 years made this happen.
I just want to say, Cathy, what an amazing achievement that was, and how brilliant it was, and how much hope it gave to the rest of us. We actually had an event that day, an online one and an offline one, and we got the news at 4 o'clock, and then we were able to announce it. So it really gave us such a massive boost to everybody there to hear that, you know, it was possible to get it through.
It is possible to get it through, and I've spent the last month partying. Now it's time to get to work because it's under threat. So I feel that each of us pushing in our own countries will help push this along. But yeah, thank you for that. And last week I was in Washington, D.C., and I have never felt so much love from so many people for what Canada achieved and on how much hope it is pulsing throughout the world. And so wonderful to hear. It's had such a positive effect in our Commonwealth friends in Britain.
It was very powerful when I was having conversations with people on Westminster Bridge, quite simply, was you could see them say, you know, the penny dropped with, oh, you mean it's for real? Yes, Canada is going to do it. Watch Canada. You know, there was that very famous cartoon where it was all blame Canada. Well, I kept saying, watch Canada, just do it. And that it was kind of, it was for real. It wasn't just a pie in the sky policy. So I think there is some hope that it could be a domino effect. I certainly felt that.
Lovely. And I think I should share 3 stories with you just so you can get a feel for how much CCL was involved in making this happen. I've been lobbying on Parliament Hill since 2011, and I befriended a senator from Edmonton. He has been my sage advisor, and when I lobbied in October, he said, Senator Grant Mitchell, in the meeting in front of everyone, said, Cathy, Citizens Climate Lobby is one of the most successful lobbying groups I've ever worked with. You're about to get what you've been lobbying for. I am the second most lobbied senator on the Hill. He reports directly to Prime Minister Trudeau. And I looked up and I was like, can I quote you? And he said, yes. So that's story number 1. So this is the power of our relationship building and our, you know, our relentlessness. Story number 2.
That's brilliant. That's brilliant. Really good.
Yeah, thank you. Story number 2. In early September, the neighboring constituency beside my constituency, or we call it ridings in Canada, but I will remove that from my vocabulary, speaking outside of Canada. So Canada's constituency are small, about 75 to 100,000 people. And I live in Northern Ontario, but our 2 constituencies we work really close together here where I live. And I get a call in August that the Member of Parliament for the neighboring constituency wants to meet with me and his star citizen climate lobbyist in his constituency. Carol has got 25 local businesses to sign our open letter for carbon pricing, and she's had 100 letters to the editor published this year. She's like unstoppable. And so he calls us in and he said, I am going to champion carbon fee and dividend in the Liberal caucus because they're going to decide what the carbon pricing policy is. I want you to support me. So we take all these great pictures with parachutes for the planet. We got all these awesome pictures. He does this flashy media release. I send out through the Twitter action team, retweet Member of Parliament Mark Saray for Nickel Belt because he's championing the carbon fee and dividend. We get it retweeted. We get him retweeted about 60, 70 times for what he's done. We get to Parliament Hill He tells us that our Twitter response sealed the deal. That's why they finally chose carbon fee and dividend. They were going to do an income tax swap. There was a infight amongst the Liberal parties about what was the best policy. And our capacity to muster up the troops to support this one member of Parliament convinced the Liberals insiders that carbon fee and dividend was the best policy to use. Lastly, in 2015, a new member of Parliament was elected in a riding in downtown Toronto where people are very concerned about climate change. And they give her a very hard time at first because it's very hard. Well, you know, we live in a country where our government still approves pipelines and does things like that, right? So it's very difficult. And so they had this difficult relationship, but they kept pushing carbon fee and dividend on her. And they just had, downtown Toronto just had their carbon fee and dividend party. And this member of Parliament showed up. Her name's Julie DeBrusen. And she was, and they asked her, they said, well, she thanked them. She said, I thank you for, you know, educating me about carbon fee and dividend. And then she said, your group is a big reason why we have this in Canada now. So you can make a difference. Just, and it doesn't take a lot of work. It just takes focused work, building those relationships and letting your volunteers do what speaks to their heart. Like, I didn't tell Carol to write 100 letters to the editor. Carol just loves to do it. So, and she, whatever. So those are my 3 stories.
Cathy, could I just ask a question?
Yes, please.
Cathy, you're telling a wonderful story, and you're making it very clear, or at least the way I'm reading it, is that it's a very personal thing.
Yes.
This is really one-to-one.
Yes.
Rather than your achievements. Is that fair? Is that a way of characterizing it?
Yeah, absolutely. 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 Like when I meet MP Serret, well, he's French, so I mean, we do the, like, you know, the French side kisses. Like, who kisses their MP? No. When I meet the senator, who's like got such, like, he's like 4th in like line, you know, in terms of importance in the House of Commons or whatever, like in all of our Parliament. It's like, I mean, when we write each other emails, like, they're so personal, and I don't even care about typos. And our relationship with MP DeBrusen, I mean, she's now like everybody's friend. Like, yeah, it's very personal. It's wonderful.
Thank you. That's a very at least for me anyway, it's a very powerful story, that.
Thank you. Who was just speaking?
It's Peter from London.
Thank you, Peter. I can't see who's talking. That was
Okay,
lovely.
yeah, sure.
Who's your constituency MP, Peter?
Oh gosh, what's the chap's name? Pennycook is a young Labour MP.
Sorry, didn't catch the name.
Matthew Pennycook.
Oh yes, yeah. Be an interesting one.
Lovely. Okay, I gotta like ground myself. Storytelling. Okay.
Cathy,
Yes.
Dave here from Henley.
Hey, Dave.
Can I ask you what the general reception has been in the media to this in Canada, and also are there projections on how it's going to affect the exploitation of the tar sands, and what's going to happen to aircraft journey costs and car fuel costs and so on?
Great questions. Generally in the media, carbon fee and dividend was already endorsed by our major right, our major center, and our major left leaning papers. We had already done that work. So they were mostly happy about it. Fantastic work done by our TV and radio. Explaining it to people, but a lot really negative, like horrible. I don't mean to say horrible, but difficult, cantankerous editors of various papers like this policy. So it's complicated. For the most part, it's been received well in the media, though. How will it impact the tar sands? It's not powerful enough yet because it only extends to 2022. It's only $50 a ton. We're still struggling quite immensely on sorting out provincial animosities towards this as well. Okay, I'm about to get really wonky and complicated, so for those of you who want to take a tea break and don't like wonkiness, please do that now. Go boil your water. And maybe if I explain it, let me first explain the next slide and maybe this will make sense, okay? I just want to give a brief overview of the backstop, and then I'll explain why it's not going to have the most powerful impacts on our tar sands exploitations. Okay, so the overview of the federal backstop, which is what we call our carbon pricing policy in Canada, because if you're a province with carbon pricing, you don't get this. It's only in the provinces without carbon pricing. So the fossil fuel production and distribution is signed, there's a price on pollution on these various fossil fuels, and there's some exclusions. For consumers, we do not pay the fuel charge directly to the government. That's already been paid for at the distribution and production level. It's embedded into the cost, and then all of that money is rebated to us equally, regardless of income or regardless of our fossil fuel, our carbon footprint. This is where it gets complicated. So the consumers pay one price, right? And so do many businesses, small and medium-sized enterprises. Where it gets really complicated is at the emissions-intensive trade-exposed industries. They go under something like a cap-and-trade system. It's not quite cap-and-trade. There is a market signal. The better you are at reducing your carbon emissions, the less price you're going to pay, but you're not going to pay nearly as much as consumers, but at least there is a market signal. And then, so that means for those of you who really follow carbon pricing really closely, it means that we're not going to be enacting border carbon adjustment on our fossil fuels. Lastly, much of our tar sands are not used domestically, they're used internationally. So it really doesn't reduce tar sands production, because that's going to have to happen globally. And it kind of makes sense not to create a policy that would reduce our fossil fuel production, because why should Canada slit its own throat when the rest of the world isn't? Does that make sense?
Border adjustments are supposed to be about, though, isn't it?
Yeah, but a tiny country like Canada, we could not go up against the United States of America in a trade war.
Would the same be said for a tiny country like the UK?
Yeah, we kind of got to all work together on that. So I think what Canada is showing smaller countries, you're at the lower carbon prices below $50 a ton. It's not, you don't need border carbon adjustments to protect your emissions intensive trade exposed industries. You can do something like this pseudo cap and trade market signal that's going on in Canada. And what we need are the big countries like China and India and the United States. When they enact a carbon pricing policy, perhaps they will include border carbon adjustments, and that will start spurring the world As well, just for your own notes, just how complex this is. The United States is our #1 trading partner in Canada. And there is a regulatory body that reports directly to the Privy Council, the Prime Minister's office and his bureaucrats. And this regulatory body looks at US and Canadian trade. And they are doing a study looking at how, for us at Citizens Climate Lobby Canada, how Canada and the USA could enact border carbon adjustments as the world develops a carbon pricing policy. So anyway, so to answer your question, no, it's not really going to impact tar sands production. We are looking at decreasing consumption, not production. Those are two totally different things. Not two totally different things, because once you start decreasing consumption, then production goes down. Eventually, once the whole world's doing it. Is that all making sense? Does anybody want to clarify or ask a question?
Well, I have a question, and that because one of the first questions that hard-headed people ask us is about global competitiveness, is about how businesses in this country will not be competitive. And we typically say, oh, there's this wonderful thing called border carbon adjustments, which will, not only make us competitive, but actually incentivize other countries. And actually, we can't say that, can we? And I think we need some guidance on how to answer that question without stopping the whole conversation.
Okay, so there's 3 layers to answering that question. Well, competitiveness can be addressed through you build a trade agreement with other countries, and you can embed climate change targets in that going forward. That's one thing you can do. And that is actually one of the gifts of cap and trade when you start doing that, because it automatically embeds that in your trading agreement when you're doing it across countries. So then you don't need border carbon adjustments. So anyways, trading agreements can embed climate targets in them, and then you can sort that out amongst your trading partners. Secondly, you can use Canada as a model on how to deal with competitiveness issues. Canada is showing the world the way forward. And thirdly, as the price rises and as more and more countries start pricing carbon, yes, ultimately they can form a bloc that can enact border carbon adjustments on the recalcitrant countries that just won't budge. That answer?
Yeah, that's great. Thank you very much. Yeah.
Could I sort of chuck in a sort of supplementary question there? It's a sort of organizational question, really, Cathy.
Okay.
That slide, as you described it, there's a lot of very wonky stuff there. Now, does CCL and Canada partner with? I mean, well, let me start again. In England anyway, that sort of thinking would very likely be pioneered by think tanks or academics or other groups, whereas as I read it, CCL is primarily about mobilizing the action of volunteers. Did you, as it were, do you deal with that sort of thing in-house, so to speak, or do you partner with other groups or charities or whatever they might be to supplement that sort of thinking?
That is an excellent question. To be clear, Citizens Climate Lobby Canada is 99% grassroots mobilization. Occasionally, because we're a bunch of geeks, we get a little bit wonky because it's fun. We don't have the resources. But what we do rely on are the many amazing policy wonks and institutions in Canada. Many of them have been guest speakers on our monthly Canadian Citizens Climate Lobby education calls. We've also had numerous regional and federal conferences where we have brought in speakers. So we rely heavily on probably 5 major organizations in Canada monitoring the data that they're putting out, and that would be the Pembina Institute, Canada's Ecofiscal Commission, Clean Energy Canada, Canadians for Clean Prosperity, and just generally stuff coming out of the Climate Action Network Canada. And we are hooked into all of those organizations through email lists and regular conversations. Is that helpful?
That's very helpful. And so would it be fair to say that what you're describing, what came to pass, what was legislated, was a CCL policy, or was it a more, as it were, generic policy of the sorts of organizations you just described?
It's not exactly like carbon fee and dividend, but it's probably, well, it is carbon, it's close enough to it. Canada's Ecofiscal Commission supported carbon fee and dividend. They're a major think tank in Montreal. One of our very left-leaning organizations in Canada supports it. There are economists that support it. So I would have to say it was a collective, because this government spent 3 years conversing with many people. Oh yes, and Canadians for Clean Prosperity championed carbon fee and dividend. Anyways, I think it was CCL started it. CCL generated the grassroots support. CCL built many of the networks, but then those in our networks and in our collective, in all the negotiations, made this happen. So I'd say we're a big part behind it, and I don't think it ever would have happened without us, but we didn't do it alone.
Okay, thank you. And I promise this is my last comment on this. So there was a kind of consensus between various lobbying or think tank organizations around this particular policy.
Yeah, I think Ontario's cap and trade and spend program, because it was not revenue neutral, and how it crashed and burned, I think was a nail in the coffin for cap and trade, and also being obtuse with how government revenue is spent, and how people are so stretched financially that even the thought of paying $20 more a year in taxes freaks people out. I think that was probably a big reason why they decided to go the carbon fee and dividend route, to be completely transparent to the population that no, we're not taking more money, we're actually giving you more money back. So it's not just us. It's many things layering together, but it never would have happened without us. I can confidently, unless there was an organization like us.
Can I ask a question? I mean, you may be talking about this later, but we have discussions within CCL UK about who the main kinds of people who are going to be interested in CCL are, and there's this idea that it's because it's a policy and because it's involves economics, that it would be, you know, I suppose clever people with a degree of interest in wonkiness about them. So I wondered what you thought about that, Cathy. What advice you would have about that?
Well, try to generate as broad a base of support as possible. But at the end of the day, I mean, when I look at our group, yeah, I mean, it seems that most people in our group, if they don't have a university degree, have a university level of understanding. But there are places for those who don't have, there are many ways to mobilize people that will, and they never need to have that level of understanding. So be creative. I know it's hard, which unfortunately makes this a very white movement in Canada and the United States, and it shouldn't be, because this policy is for everyone. So it's complex. You need to have a certain level of understanding of numbers and economics and science to do this work, and then the time to do it as well. So, but do your best to just keep recruiting others.
And I suppose there's a difference between who you have actively involved in the organisation going out and the people that you talk to. I guess the people that you talk to have to be, by necessity, a much wider kind of people, have to be everybody at that point.
Yeah, you have to make it for everybody. I mean, currently now in Canada, we're contemplating translating our documents into Cantonese, Mandarin, and Punjabi, so we can reach out to those populations, just to make sure, they get what this is all about. That's something we're contemplating quite heavily, because this movement is too, for lack of better words, white European in Canada. And I apologize if that's offensive to people. It's just, there's no other words I can use.
Not at all. We're looking at organising our first conference, and I think it's really important that we maintain a diversity of gender, age, colour, as much as possible, because people want to see themselves at this thing if they're going to get involved in it.
Yeah, well, my recommendation is don't get wonky with people. Like, keep it really simple. Don't have these in-depth things like we're doing right now, because this gets really boring for some people, and I apologize to others that this is happening. Keep it really simple. Just keep it. We're about carbon fee and dividend, and if you don't know the details, don't worry. We'll always have somebody with you who will know the details. If you just support carbon fee and dividend, that's great. Don't worry about learning the details.
We love your cartoon. We loved your cartoon strip. We plagiarized it and adapted it, and we use it.
Yeah. Yes. Thank you. That was actually, that was recommended by a member of parliament who was of African and Canadian descent, and he's also an artist. So it was his idea.
Oh, right.
Yes, keep it simple. Don't get wonky, and don't go into the weeds at meetings and stuff like that. Keep everybody action focused, not, yeah. So let's get action focused again, okay? These are great questions, though. It drives home the point. Okay, so how do we build political will? Politicians don't create political will, they respond to it. Sorry, I'm just gonna put that back. So we create political will one constituency at a time by building relationships and empowering our volunteers to build the political will for a livable world. And we do that by tapping on the 5 levers of political will. And I'll go through them very briefly. The first is lobbying. That's building that relationship with your member of parliament. And then we do media relations, grassroots outreach, grass tops outreach, and chapter development. But before I get into that, I have to do a little bit of a story about Citizens Climate Lobby. So our founder is Marshall Saunders. I met Marshall in 2010. I thought he was a senator. I met him at an Al Gore training. He thought I was Canadian, recruited me to Citizens Climate Lobby. I've had the privilege of spending time with this man. His energy and generosity of spirit are immense. He is why this organization exists. And he feels that ordinary people like you and me have to organize and educate ourselves, give up our hopelessness and powerlessness, and gain the skills to be effective with our government. Marshall saw the movie An Inconvenient Truth in 2006. like many of us. That's Al Gore's movie. He watched it numerous times. Marshall Saunders, look back to this picture. He was the only non-head of state ever to receive a Grameen Foundation Humanitarian Award. He developed microloans for mainly women in Latin America to pull them out of poverty. That would be like the work of Muhammad Yunus and the Grameen Bank. He did that similar sort of work in Latin America. And he saw the movie An Inconvenient Truth and realized all the work he'd been doing with poverty would be undone because we all know that the poor will be affected first and the most. He had already been working with poverty in the organization Results, and he got trained by Al Gore, and he gave like, I don't know, the legend has it, 100 presentations or so in his first 18 months, and he gets home one day and he opens the newspaper and sees that the US Congress has given another $1 billion to oil companies. He's like, well, I can't get enough people to change their light bulbs and change their cars. I think we need to change policy. And he goes, and I know how you do it, because Results already does it. They get the government to do magical things to help end poverty around the world. And they do that by building political will one constituency at a time. So he's like, so what I'll do is I'll look for an organization that is like Results, build political will for climate action one constituency at a time by lobbying for a very specific policy, and then I'll support them. And of course, none of them existed. So he founded Citizens Climate Lobby in 2007. And just tell a story about Gandhi and General Jan Smuts. And I'll make a big assumption that most of you know who Mahatma Gandhi was and who General Jan Smuts was. He was the South African general when Gandhi lived in South Africa. So Gandhi lived in South Africa, and there was apartheid there, and he wanted to help. He started his nonviolent disobedience then, and he asked for a meeting with the head of the South African Army, General Smuts. Smuts was a big man, over 6 feet tall, in full military uniform. So in walks Gandhi with that white thing. My husband's East Indian, so hope that didn't sound too off-putting. Anyways, it's a dhoti, and it looks like a big diaper. Anyways, and Gandhi says, I'm here to tell you that I oppose your government. And really, says Smuts, anything else I should know? Yes, says Gandhi, I intend to prevail. And General Smuts then asks, really? How do you intend to do that? Gandhi replies, with your help. And when Gandhi died, General Smuts said, he appealed to what was best and most noble in me. And that's the approach we take. Just a little bit more about our background. We have a pretty incredible advisory board. We have Dr. Catherine Hayhoe, a Canadian climate scientist whose husband is also an evangelical a preacher. And if you ever need to just listen to somebody who knows how to talk to people who do not grasp the situation and can be negative, listen to Dr. Catherine Hayhoe. She is so amazing in how she speaks to people, and I always hear her smile when she's talking. She has many great quotes, but here's one. I don't believe in climate change. Belief doesn't come into it. Scientific verification does. Gravity doesn't care whether you believe in it or not. But if you step off a cliff, you're going to go down. Also on our advisory board is climate scientist Dr. James Hansen. and Joel Schultz, former Treasury Secretary and Secretary of State, to Ronald Reagan, amongst others. Okay, so so let's just take a moment. No, I'm not going to do that. We're going to run out of time. All right, so I'm going to back up. So that was just a little bit of a, sorry I did that. That was a little bit mixed up. So we lobby, and these are just pictures of people lobbying. Because we're over the internet, this is complicated, but there is a checklist, and if you want more details, I can point you to the Canadian ones, and then you can make them more relevant to where you are. When you go into a meeting with a member of Parliament or Congress, you thank them and you appreciate them for something they've done. And you also do a time check, because we really value everybody's time. And then you do brief introductions, and then you get really specific about your appreciation. Nothing smooths the way more than showing a politician that you have actually learned about them and understood some of their motivations and some of their passions. And then you deliver you can deliver, well, it says here deliver constituent comments, but you can also, because that's what we do at CCL, is collect comments, but you can also show them recent stuff that your group has been doing, and then you state your purpose and your ask. And then you go, which will generally be carbon fee and dividend, but then you can have secondary asks, like, well, you figure those out. Now, this part is the most important. You should be actively listening. That means you're not getting ready to debate or argue. You're trying to ask them questions so you can understand what their concerns are. You had more time. There's this wonderful motivational interviewing. You ask, you can explore that at CCL University. You ask W questions like, how do you think this will go over in your party? Who across the aisle do you sit with? What do you think are the barriers? How can we help you overcome the barriers? So you're asking W questions that you think are logical. And by W questions, I mean questions that are open-ended and have W in them. Like, when do you think, whatever. So the question why you try not to use, because that can send you down a rabbit hole. You ask opening questions, like, is it okay if we take the discussion in this way? Anyways, what you're trying to do is listen for their values and find common ground and overcome obstacles. And you just trying to figure out how you can move forward together. So let me just give an example in the USA and Canada for primary asks and secondary asks. So we, in the USA, they asked for supporting carbon fee and dividend. A lot of the time, this time when we lobbied, we asked them if they would consider making climate change a bridge issue and not a wedge issue. That was our primary ask. We didn't want to go into the weeds on carbon pricing. We wanted a more general question. And then groups got to decide what their secondary ask was when we were lobbying in Washington last week. So if a member didn't belong to the carbon pricing, if a member didn't belong to the Bipartisan Climate Solutions Caucus, then we would ask them to join that, or we asked them if they belong to committees, if they would host hearings. So anyways, you come up with your primary ask and your secondary asks, and you're trying to move your member of parliament down the field. And then wrapping it up again, make sure you've gotten across clearly your ask and you're supporting ask. You ask that who do you work across the aisle with, and what can we do more of, and then hammering out what the follow-up items would be. These are people from Utah. That's Republican Mia Love. She sits on the Bipartisan Climate Solutions Caucus. CCL has one rule and one rule only: treat everyone, even those you disagree with us, with respect, appreciation, and gratitude. So that is lobbying, and I wish we had time to practice, but any questions or comments or stories that you have about lobbying?
Judy, shall I say something?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Please.
We watched one or two of the videos from the USA. There was one person who we could quite cheerfully have murdered due to their voice, but we avoided that. But we took quite a lot of that from us, and we had a little script which we can easily pass on to others. And we did follow that as a template, and it was very, very successful. There were 4 of us, and we practiced beforehand, which we found very useful. And one of us sort of didn't take a lot of part in the questioning, but took notes about it and things, so that it was quite structured, but I found it was really useful. And Claire Perry loved it because she said, I know what you were going to do, I knew the time, I knew what I had to do, and thank you very much. So, you know, I felt that she was quite on board. Did you, Judy, when we did that way?
Yeah, I thought she really appreciated the way we showed that we valued her time.
Yeah.
And she was very complimentary to her. She said, oh my gosh, if we worked like this in Parliament, we'd get stuff done.
Yeah. So it would be something that, you know, we could pass on to another group and just show them how we did it. And it was a very simple template. So it was good.
And we got some specific questions from her too.
Yeah.
That's excellent. Yeah, CCL has excellent resources that you can find at CCL University. You can lean on each other. You can lean on me a little bit too. If you give me a little bit of warning, I sometimes have time in my schedule. Not so much the second week of the month, but when I was first lobbying, Mark Reynolds would always call me before and after. Like he always, that's the executive director. So he was always coaching me. It would be like 5-10 minutes of coaching before, and then it would be, you know, 5 to 10 minutes of coaching afterwards. I found that to be really useful. So having your support systems, looking at CCL University, maybe taking time to do some role playing before you go lobby. If you've never lobbied before, like sit down with your group for an hour before you go lobby to make sure you've got that all sorted out. The really most important part is the listening part and asking really good questions. Yeah, that's great. Anything else? Okay.
I just want to ask about seeing somebody not your MP or going to Parliament, like for us going to Parliament to see a department rather than your MP. And do you just stick with your constituency MPs, or do you go and talk straight to, I don't know, Department of Energy or Environment, or whatever the equivalent is?
We don't lobby the bureaucrats. We lobby the members of Parliament. We are powerful because we are constituent lobbyists. You have to determine how much you want to expend. Sometimes you may have incredible policy wonks amongst you that can really hammer home to the bureaucrats and or the committees in Parliament. that's your own decision. I just would like to reinforce that you are powerful lobbyists because you are constituents, and that is a great force that you, power that you wield.
That's. I'm glad you said that. That sort of gives me confidence to stick with that. I guess because I've had a couple of letters back from our MP, Claire Perry, who's the Minister for Clean Energy, Clean Growth. So she works with the Environment Secretary. And I've got a couple of letters back from her now. One that said we take our lead from the Treasury was the latest one I got back from her, which is the first time she said that. But in Parliament, she's been saying she's been talking to the Climate Change Committee and asking them for advice. So at that point, I thought perhaps we should be talking to the Climate Change Committee as well as, I don't know about Treasury, leave the Treasury alone, but
perhaps. Yeah, just ask her if she needs your help. So let me tell you a story. Our neighboring MP was a member of the Natural Resources Committee, and fossil fuel subsidies are a very complex and emotionally laden discussion in the House of Commons and amongst the people of Canada. And our official policy includes ending fossil fuel subsidies. And so we were having lunch with this member of Parliament who sits on the Natural Resources Committee, and he was a new MP, and he knew barely anything about fossil fuel subsidies. And he said, I need your help with fossil fuel subsidies on the Natural Resources Committee. So we struck a team of 8 people who spent literally 9 months, and we had fun, okay, because we're wonky, studying fossil fuel subsidies in Canada, working together to develop a 1-page document and then a presentation for which we gave to the entire Natural Resources Committee in 2017 on fossil fuel subsidies. And we are happy to say that in June of that year, even though we gave that presentation in October, the Natural Resources Committee passed a committee document that basically included unanimously approving of carbon pricing and examining fossil fuel subsidies. So the take-home message from this is, if you feel you have the capacity and this might be a way you can help, then offer the help, but don't offer the help if you don't think you have it. To speak to other committees. Is that okay?
That's great, thanks.
Never an easy answer, is it? Okay, any last questions about lobbying? So prepare, ask lots of great questions, listen, and yeah, and remember your constituents, and that makes you very powerful. I'm trying to change my page here. Are you there?
Yeah, we're here.
Yeah, we're here. You're not. And the page, we've got a photo.
Yeah, it won't move. I don't know why. Hold on a second, please. I don't know what's happening here. Just give me a second. I'll reshare. I don't know what happened to my...
At least I know what the Canadian flag looks like now.
Let me try again. For some reason, my screen froze on me. It's not moving. Oh, that's weird. Technical issues. Okay, so the first lever you pull on is the is lobbying. The second one is working with your media. You write letters to the editor and opinion editorials, and what you're trying to do ultimately is get a meeting with the editorial boards, and you're going to lobby editorial boards of your local papers to be more proactive on, climate change and educate them on carbon pricing and ultimately endorse carbon fee and dividend. And remember, we're bottom up. So you are members of your community, and these are your local papers, and they should be listening to you.
Quick question there, Cathy. You mentioned local papers. Are you serious about that? You're not interested in the national ones?
If you live in London and you have the bandwidth to get to your big papers, absolutely go. We visited Canada's 2 of our 3 big national papers in Toronto as well. But we totally peppered all the papers with letters to the editor. So even the far right leaning one, the one that eventually endorsed carbon fee and dividend in September 2017, oh my goodness, we must have sent so many letters to the editor to them. It was crazy. Okay, enough said. All right, yep. So just read your paper, respond in the news. I don't have time to go into tips on working with the media. Again, at CCL University, there are excellent resources on how to write letters to the editor. It's all about timing. If you read something, you should be reading your paper every day and then respond within 24 hours and then learn how to respond. You refer to something said in the article or comment on it and name drop and be short and concise and don't run on and on in sentences. But I don't have time to get into that. But there are great resources at CCL.
Can I just jump in there as well? Because I work in PR, my husband's a journalist, so if anybody needs any help or any tips on talking to the media or writing to the media, then just drop me a line.
Wonderful. And then we do our grassroots outreach lever. So we table, we go out to public speaking, do public speaking, and we organize events. Or we crash events like the Extinction Rebellion and go in with our stuff and start handing it out. And that's the fun stuff. That's where you engage with your community. And then you also do grass tops outreach. You find community leaders, whether they be religious or business. Or maybe you have a fantastic municipal or regional councillor who everybody respects, and if you get them to become a climate champion, and then that might influence your federal politics. You strategize, you educate them, and then you seek endorsements. And lastly, you develop your chapter, organize monthly meetings, you have your communications, and you mentor new volunteers. Now, also, we do laser talks, and those are really short, powerful talks. And they're brief. They're not meant to be memorized. They're meant to be internalized, and they will eventually help you respond in your own words. So, classic laser talk is the carbon fee and dividend one. If that's all your volunteers learn, that is awesome. A fee is placed on fossil fuels at the source, starts at $15 a ton of CO2 emitted and increases $10 a ton per year. The net revenues are returned to households. You have to get your UK data, but at least in Canada, the United States, and Australia, at least 2/3 break even or receive more in their dividend checks than they pay in higher prices. Embrace your political differences. And then this goes on and on about conservatives, so I'm just going to let that go. So just, don't think you have to pull on everyone as a person. Figure out which one you like. Some people like to arrange the meetings and set them up. Other people like to work with the media. Other people like to do the grassroots outreach, or the grass tops outreach. Others like to do the stuff behind the scenes to make sure that your chapter develops. So when you're developing your group, try to get a handle on the different roles that people are going to have. And again, there's great resources at Citizens Climate Lobby to show you how to do that. So I'm going to step back a bit and I'm going to turn off my screen and ask, what gives you hope at this point? What gives you hope? So I will role model that. What has given me hope lately, because although I'm very excited about what's happened in Canada, it feels a little bit daunting now that we have to protect it. And what's giving me hope is knowing what's going on all around the world. I have front row seats to what is going on, and there's so much stuff I can't even tell you, but really amazing work going on. So it's just all the work everyone's doing. Someone else want to share what is giving them hope?
Yeah. Is it Ed in Henley? When we went to the Policy Exchange meeting in London, the consensus was that Fee and Dividend was the mood music, in the same way that cap and trade was in the 90s, when that was, and early 2000s when that was being introduced. That's sort of out of fashion now, and they were saying that among politicians and sort of policy people that Fee and Dividend is the kind of mood music and where things seem to be flowing towards.
Wonderful. I just got a message from Susie. She's holding a baby on her lap, and Canada is giving her hope. A sleeping baby on her lap. Her microphone is off, and Canada is giving her hope. Well, that baby is giving me hope right now, too. Who else would like to share some hope?
It's Dave W. has asked via chat to ask a question. So do you want to, his microphone's not working, so do you want to say something, Dave? Type in your question. While Dave's doing that, I'll just say so many things at the moment. Canada, the two Nobel Prize winners for economics working in sustainable economics, that gave me real hope. The Policy Exchange certainly gave me hope. But then when I think about, on a really basic back to nature way, when I think about things like all the penguins that didn't make it this year, and I feel really depressed about that, I actually look up in the sky out here and we have red kites flying around, which are scavenger birds, but they look like they were going to die out in this country, and now there are just loads of them. So it is possible to turn things around and make things happen. Oh, apparently Dave's question was 45 minutes ago, so sorry, Dave.
Well, we'll catch questions at the end, but I'm leaving about 15 minutes and then we'll wrap up. But anybody else want to share some hope before we move back to questions? I love hearing the hope.
Yeah, I think Policy Exchange in Canada, and we've got a planning meeting this Saturday from the steering committee and possibly others. I don't know whether they join us, but this Zoom talk's certainly given me a lot of food for thought. Hope might be too strong a word, because I'm just thinking there's 101 things we need to do, but it's given us some clear pointers. And this 800 days really focuses the mind marvellously. So I think it's a bit of a double-edged sword for me, but there are certainly hopeful signs.
If I can throw in mine, they're mostly about technology, actually, and I suppose I'm singing more or less the same song as Al Gore, that we're continually surprised by the rate at which positive new technologies come stream, the rate at which solar and offshore wind have their costs have dropped in a spectacular way and a completely unexpected way over the last 5 to 10 years. And although in some quarters that's known as a techno fix, and that's not smiled upon very much, it gives me some hope anyway.
That's so wonderful. Yeah, the technology stuff gives me hope too. Every time I look at my phone, I get hopeful. I mean, this thing, like we can, yeah, okay. Anyone else?
Okay.
Hi, it's Bruce. Is
Sorry.
that Judy? You wanted to talk to Judy?
Yes. Go ahead, Bruce.
Okay, it's Bruce. About 2 weeks ago, our county, which is about 600,000 people, our county supervisors and executive passed a resolution supporting carbon fee and dividend. And what that does is it adds another county, another jurisdiction in our state of Wisconsin that supports that, and then we then send that information on to our members of Congress and our senators. Hopefully that will prod them along in the line. When Peter was talking about technology and the fact that solar and wind energy costs have gone down by 70 and 80% over the past 10 years, what that has done is it allows people who make financial decisions about the environment rather than making green decisions about the environment. It allows them to say, hey, this is a business decision, and they don't have to get involved in whether it's a morality or protecting the climate decision. So I'm actually a liaison from our chapter to a group of conservative business people who are going around our state and advocating for renewable energy, and we're hoping to leverage that to get them to work with us and work with our federal members of Congress on some of the climate issues we want. Let's see, another thing that I wanted to mention is that there are more and more medium and large corporations, not necessarily the oil companies or the natural gas companies or coal companies, but large corporations like Google and Facebook and large international banks that have sustainability programs that are very powerful, and they're moving, slowly and surely away from carbon emissions, and they make commitments to that. So that's good because it reduces them, or actually it gets them on our side, and rather than on the other side. Thank you.
Thank you. Those are wonderful things to be hopeful about, because it's just it's rolling forward, and I think there'll come a point where it'll just be unstoppable. Anyone else?
Okay. I've been speaking exactly the same time as somebody else. So I'm waiting for somebody else to jump in. What I've found is very odd is that what makes me hopeful is trying to share it around. I asked a few people I know to just come around and have a glass of wine. And I said, I've got some hopeful things to tell you about the climate. And they were so excited. And when I started making a list, it was an amazingly long list. And it was the policy exchange and Canada. And then it was, our Louisa gave a presentation to our local council. And the response was wonderful. The mayor, she was asking for an endorsement from our local council, which is the kind of thing that, at a different level, that Bruce was talking about just now. Well, you know, this little buddy. We have a humdinger of a mayor at the moment, and she leapt out of her chair saying how excited she was about it. And actually, I just am always interested to find how sharing the excitement creates excitement in me. So, you know, sitting alone, I can be very aware of all the problems. And yeah, but getting a little spark from somebody else is wonderful.
Yes, there's so much to be hopeful for. The default position for most people is despair. So every now and then, be sure to just go down your list. It'll help amazingly, keeping you positive.
There's a chat from Dave coming through.
Tipping point.
Oh, I love it. Do you want to read it, Gina?
Sorry, I'll just bring it up. Okay. This is from Dave. Several times in my life, I've seen dramatic changes in attitude almost overnight. Racism, sexism, homophobia are good examples, but drink driving is another very different example. This gives me hope that CFD can go from unknown to mainstream really fast. Yeah, that's really true, Dave. Thank you.
Anyone else? I'm delightful. I'm going to share my screen again.
I just wanted to say everybody here now is giving me hope. That we've got people here listening to this, being part of the talk is really hopeful. And the people who are joining, like Susie, who's new to CCL, joining and helping, that also gives me hope too.
Yeah, me too. At one point, Louise and I thought we'd scratch around to get 2 people, which we were a bit embarrassed about, but it's been, you know, there's 10 of us here, and that's a really, really good group. Well, actually, it's 15 because Ed counts for 5. Yeah.
That's a huge number. It really is. So, yeah, just your numbers are fantastic. So, I want to leave about 7 minutes here for any questions or comments, and then we'll wrap up for the last 5 minutes. Does that sound okay?
Yep, that's really good.
Okay, great. So, oh goodness, I can't see the chat. I'm going to stop sharing again. So any questions or comments, thoughts?
For some time now, I've thought that my best place to put my energies, being the kind of person who does admin, is really making sure we know where all our constituents are. About between a third and a half of the list, we've got names and contact details, but we don't know where they are. And I think getting people networked so that they've got that power to begin making relationships with their constituency MP, you know, from what you've said, it's really made me realise how important that is. So Judy's going to be invited around with a bottle of wine, because it's the only way you can get her out of her house in the winter. And we're going to start hitting this phone. And then I think that will really start moving us forward.
Oh, you're going to call me around for a phone bank.
Well, yeah, but the wine will help.
No, I love talking to people. The guys that I was with at Extinction Rebellion, I said to them that we found that so powerful, phoning. Would they all be willing to be part of the phone bank? And they all said yes.
Marvelous.
So if we could work that out, and then I came home and thought, oh my God, how does that work with the new confidentiality?
We'll get through that. Don't worry.
But I think the energy, it has made such a difference to me over the years, having personal contacts with other volunteers, and And then I know these guys get the same kind of charge about it.
Yeah.
So hopefully they can pass it on to some of that third out there.
That's fantastic. Phone banking and then making those connections and creating your web, so important. We have, thank you from Dave, thank you for the inspiring talk and for your time this evening. Back at you, Dave, back to all of you. It's been a wonderful afternoon for me. And Canada, is there a chance the new policy will be reversed? I believe there is a lot of resistance. It's like I said, I was going to party the first month we got this policy, but now we've got to get to work. There is resistance. There's a constitutional challenge. And then we have an election to get through. That's why I'm relying on all of you across the planet to keep pulling for carbon fee and dividend, so it'll make any resistance from those who resist look silly. So it's there's resistance. If you want to feel a little bit better, Prime Minister Trudeau is leading in the polls. And generally, if a prime minister is leading in the polls within a year of election, he or she rarely, well, only ever had one she, they rarely get defeated in the election. But there is resistance, and we're not taking anything for granted. So, and if it makes you feel even more better, CCL is dedicating a tiny bit of their resources to Canada this year. And they've never really, they were really like being very specific on how they're going to help us. So, and they've never done that in the past. So they're helping us as well, which is nice. Yes. I mean, they've always helped us, but now they're being specific about their help, which is lovely. So, okay. Thank you, Susie. Thanks for the great talk. Thanks for bringing the baby and all you shared. From Bruce and Pat and everyone, the Church of England and other faith organizations have climate statements on their website. Yes, 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 absolutely. Our religious leaders are doing a fantastic work.
One of the former Archbishop of Canterbury, George Carey, he's very actively involved in rebellion extinction, so we know they're very into it.
Lovely. Are they also doing the school strikes in England? The kids striking from school with Greta from Sweden? No, that's a whole other thing. Don't worry about it. But it's something happening in Canada. Germany's on board for it. I think like countries are starting to strike from school. It's associated with Extinction Rebellion because a lot of the kids who are striking from school are also involved in Extinction Rebellion. But that's a whole other conversation. Sorry I opened a can of worms right at the end. But that's how this work is. So,
but can I ask you one quick question, since you're the international person as well?
Yes.
Well, Macron is having a hard time. Is there any CCL presence in France now?
They're very minor. And I think what's happening is we have a far-right movement happening across this planet. And they're able to mobilize people. So,
but it's just unfortunate to see him expressing his concern for the climate by a big tax hike, which gives his opponents such a weapon.
He should have made it revenue neutral and gave the money back to the people.
Exactly. I was just wondering whether there were any voices in France.
Yeah, unfortunately, the person from France who contacted me a day before I went to I went to the District of Columbia when I went to Washington D.C. So, no, we don't have much of a presence. Seriously, UK, Germany are probably our most and Sweden are our most active grassroots sort of level of mobilization in Europe, and most everybody else is just hit and miss. So no.
That sounds like a good reason to go to Paris.
We'll just have to set an example and then
Yeah, the three of us will have to go to Paris. It's quite clear.
Yeah, thanks, Gina. You picked it up.
Yeah. No, that's okay.
Hope somebody can speak French.
Okay. I'm going to share my screen one last time. It's always impossible until it's done. After the final no, there comes a yes. And on that yes, the future of the world depends. The future world depends. This has been a lovely afternoon, evening. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks very much.
Thank you
Yeah,
very much.
thank you very much indeed, Cathy.
Appreciate it.
Appreciate all of you too. If you need my help, you're lobbying or anything, yes, I'm here to help. Thank you, everyone. Good night.
Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye. Thank you so much.